Well, we've all been waiting a while, but the A7s III is finally here, and it's very impressive. It brings 4K 120 frames a second, 10-bit 422, and from the looks of it, the exceptional low-light performance that we've just come to expect from Sony's A7S line. This really is a leap forwards in terms of video capabilities for Sony's A7 lineup, and I think we can all agree it is shaping up to be an incredibly exciting year for mirrorless cameras. There are definitely times where we doubted that this camera might ever come. The hugely popular A7S was released in April 2014, with the Mark II coming about a year and a half after that. And since then, Sony's have dominated the full-frame mirrorless market for both stills and video, but with no sign of an A7S III for the past 5 years. We're now at the point though where Sony's competition has just very viable full-frame mirrorless competitors. Panasonic has the S1H and the S1, and Canon announced the R5 and R6 only 3 weeks ago now. So all eyes have been on Sony to see how they're going to respond. And this is a very important camera for Sony. It will be the difference between keeping that market share or customers just heading back to Canon or Panasonic. And personally, I think this could well be the camera to convince people to stay. So let's start as always with the sensor. It's a 12 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor, just like on the previous A7S models. But it's important to note that this is a completely new sensor. It's not just the previous sensor pushed that little bit further. It has back sensor illumination, which is new, and Sony are claiming 15 stops of dynamic range in video recording, which is pretty impressive. After all, they claim their FX9 has 15 plus stops, so not really that much more possibly. We don't have a camera here to test out ourselves, but what we've seen so far from people who do has looked great, both in low light conditions and in decent light ones. The biggest changes come in the record format options. The A7S II used Sony's XAVC-S codec at 100 megabits a second, which is quite a low bit rate for 4K video, and it's always been one of the main limitations of the camera. The Mark III improves things here dramatically, and it's one of the changes that I'm just most pleased to see. Alongside the normal XAVC-S, there are two new codecs, XAVC-S-I, which is an all-I version, and XAVC-HS, which is the H.265 version for smaller file sizes. But you don't need to enable that H.265 to get any extra functionality like you do on some other cameras. Sony give you lots of choice as well on how much color information you want in each mode, with XAVC-S being either 10-bit 422 or 8-bit 420, XAVC-S-I being only 10-bit 422, and XAVC-HS is always 10-bit, but you can choose between 422 and 420. It does get a bit confusing, but essentially you can get 10-bit 422 in all modes, which is really nice. Slow motion has received a huge upgrade over the Mark II as well, with 4K going up to 120 frames a second and HD going up to 240 frames a second. And also this does raise the data rate now for better quality at those higher frame rates, which is really important. I won't go over all the details of the data rates in this video because there's a lot going on, but to pick out a few highlight ones, 4K XAVC-S-I is 250 megabits a second at 25p and 500 megabits a second at 50p. And that's a lot better than the 100 megabits a second which we've seen in the current batch of A7 cameras. The 120 frames a second, by the way, in 4K is available in 280 megabits a second, so it won't be quite as nice as the 600 megabits a second 4K 50 and 60p because it's less than half the bit rate for twice as many frames. But it should be a big step up from what we're used to seeing with slow motion on these cameras. Overall, the video files that you're going to get from this camera will be far more robust than we've seen from any A7 cameras to date. And for when you need even more, they've enabled 16-bit RAW out over the full-size HDMI port to an external recorder like the Atomos Ninja 5. This is a big deal. Sure, it's not the internal RAW recording like on the new Canon R5 or on Blackmagic's cameras, but it is still 16-bit RAW. Even Sony's own FX9 needs the big and expensive XDCA back to enable that. So it's great to see Sony adding this to a camera this small and at this price point. The camera's physical design is very similar to the A7 IV, but with some important differences. First off, the Viewfinder is a 9.4 million dot OLED EVF, which is the highest resolution option we've seen on the market yet. And for people who like to film holding the camera up to their face in photographer mode, like I do, this will be a huge difference. For when you don't want to use the EVF though, the LCD screen is now fully articulating. We get 2 card slots, which at first glance look like normal SD card slots, and they are. You can use them with normal SD cards, but they're also multifunctional. You can use them with a new type of card, CF Express Type A. Sony are releasing some of these cards alongside this camera, but you don't need them for most of what the camera is capable of. You can still record all the video options to SD cards. Using CF Express Type A right now will probably only speed up your offload times and maybe increase your stills buffer. But being able to use the same card slot for 2 different styles of media without an adapter is a really nice touch. This is an incredibly exciting new camera and personally just ticks all the boxes of what I was hoping an A7S would be for all these years. We'll do a hands-on video as soon as we can, but in the meantime, we're going to be talking to filmmaker Philip Bloom about his experiences using the camera, as he's actually one of the very few people to get some really decent access to a pre-production unit, and actually filmed a few projects with it as well. So check the description for links to that, and of course, if you want to join the pre-order list for the A7S III, then head over to proav.co.uk with the links in the description. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.